Chapter 12. The Final Murder. The sun rose over Millbrook on Friday morning, indifferent to Ian Martin's unravelling mind. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by the detritus of obsession. Empty bourbon bottles, maps of Millbrook marked with red circles and crossed-out locations, 3 different notebooks filled with increasingly illegible handwriting. Coffee had gone cold in a mug beside his laptop. His reflection in the darkened screen showed a man who hadn't slept in 36 hours, whose eyes had taken on the glassy quality of someone who'd crossed some invisible line between stressed and broken. The community centre plan stared back at him from his largest notebook, elaborate and sprawling across 4 pages. Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong, too many people who might notice accelerant being placed, exits being blocked, timer mechanisms being set. Ian's paranoid mind had spent the night imagining every possible failure point. Security cameras he'd missed, off-duty police who might be nearby, firefighters responding too quickly, survivors who'd testify about blocked doors. He couldn't afford survivors, not anymore. His hand trembled as he reached for the bourbon bottle, found it empty, reached for another. The tremor had started 3 days ago and hadn't stopped. Ian told himself it was stress, exhaustion, too much caffeine. Not fear, never fear. He refreshed his email for the 100th time that hour. Spam, bills, automated notifications. Nothing from potential buyers interested in his property listings. Nothing from investors he'd contacted about development opportunities. Nothing that would save him from the financial abyss that gaped wider every day. His phone showed the numbers with brutal clarity. $847,000 in debt between the business loan, personal credit cards, and money he'd borrowed from associates who were beginning to ask pointed questions about repayment. The properties he'd acquired through murder weren't selling. The market had cooled. Buyers were cautious, and every day the carrying costs ate deeper into his dwindling reserves. The Henderson house sat empty, costing him $2,400 a month in taxes and maintenance. The Grayson building downtown had foundation issues he hadn't known about, scaring off potential buyers. Margaret Chen's apartment complex needed electrical work that would cost 6 figures. David Ortiz's restaurant property remained a burned-out shell because the insurance company was still investigating despite paying the claim. And the newest properties, Rebecca Walsh's house, Harold Pemberton's commercial space, weren't even listed yet because Ian couldn't risk the attention. Not while people who should be dead kept walking around town like nothing had happened. The insurance money from David Ortiz's house fire had paid off the most pressing debts, but new ones had accumulated faster than he'd anticipated. His business partner at Martin Realty was asking uncomfortable questions about cash flow. His accountant had sent 3 emails this week about irregularities that needed explaining. The bank had called twice about his business loan payment, which was now 45 days overdue. Ian was drowning in debt, in paranoia, in the crushing weight of murders that hadn't stayed committed. He needed a miracle, or another murder that paid out quickly. Or both. Ian's eyes fell on an envelope that had arrived 2 weeks ago, before Jennifer Wu had complicated everything by investigating him. The Millbrook Business Association's winter dinner. Tomorrow night. Riverside Inn, 7 p.m. He opened the envelope with trembling hands and pulled out the guest list. His vision blurred, then focused with sudden, terrible clarity. Eleanor Henderson, Thomas Grayson, Margaret Chen, David Ortiz, Rebecca Walsh, Harold Pemberton. All attending. All confirmed. All impossible. Ian stared at the names until they seemed to writhe on the page. These people were dead. He'd killed them personally, watched them die, verified their deaths before staging scenes and collecting insurance money. They couldn't be attending a dinner tomorrow night. They couldn't be anywhere. Unless, the thought crystallized with the force of revelation. Unless they showed up. Unless they walked through the doors of the Riverside Inn, alive and talking and eating and proving once and for all that Ian's murders had somehow failed, that the resurrections were real, that his mind wasn't fragmenting but responding correctly to an impossible situation. If they attended, he'd know for certain. And if they attended, a fire would prove whether ghosts could burn. Ian stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. The movement sent fresh waves of vertigo through his skull, but his mind felt suddenly terrifyingly clear. This was better than the community centre. Smaller venue, known layout, fewer variables. And most importantly, all of his surviving victims gathered in one location, trapped in a building he knew intimately, the Riverside Inn. Ian had attended dozens of chamber events there over the years, knew the building as well as his own office. Wood construction from the 1890s, all original materials, beautiful from a historic preservation standpoint, and absolutely perfect for arson. The walls were heart pine, old growth timber that would burn hot and fast once it caught. The floors were oak, wide planks with gaps between them that would let fire spread vertically through the building. The ceiling featured exposed beams that would collapse once the support structure failed. One main entrance through the front lobby, double doors that opened outward, easy to chain from outside. One emergency exit through the kitchen, which led to a narrow alley where a dumpster could be positioned to block egress. Small windows set high in the walls, designed for aesthetics in the Victorian era rather than safety in the modern one. The windows were maybe 2 feet square, too small for most adults to fit through, and positioned 8 feet off the ground. Fire suppression system that was probably last updated in the 1970s when the building was converted from a private residence to a restaurant. Sprinklers in the kitchen only, nothing in the main dining room. The basement housed an old oil heating system that the current owners kept meaning to replace. Ian had been down there once for a property assessment 3 years ago, back when he'd been considering purchasing the building. He remembered the smell of fuel oil, thick and chemical, the ancient boiler, probably installed in the 1950s, with patches of rust on the tank. The wooden support beams that held up the dining room floor, 6 of them, each about 12 inches in diameter, all exposed and accessible. Perfect. Ian's mind sketched the plan with increasing confidence. Set accelerant in the basement. Kerosene-soaked rags wrapped around those support beams. Placed near the oil tank where the initial fire would look like a heating system malfunction. Timer set for 7:45 p.m. Midway through dinner, when everyone would be seated at tables, comfortable, slightly drunk from the open bar, not paying attention to anything except conversation and food. Block the front entrance with chains and a padlock from outside. Position the dumpster to block the kitchen exit. Park across the street and watch. The insurance payout alone would be substantial. Ian owned the Riverside Inn through one of his shell companies, a fact he'd almost forgotten in the chaos of the past month. He'd purchased it 2 years ago as an investment property, kept the same management, let it operate as it always had. The policy was worth $800,000. But the money wasn't the point anymore. The point was certainty. The point was watching his victims, all of them, together, burn until there was nothing left to resurrect. The point was proving to himself that he wasn't insane, that the resurrections were real, and that fire could make them stop. Ian moved with manic energy, showering for the first time in 3 days. The hot water felt like it was burning his skin, but that seemed appropriate. Everything was burning now. His business, his sanity, his victims. Why should his skin be different? He dressed in business, casual, khakis, button-down shirt, navy blazer. Forced himself to shave despite the way his hands shook. Applied cologne to mask the smell of fear sweat that had become his constant companion. Looked in the mirror and saw someone who might pass for normal if you didn't look too closely at the eyes. Good enough. The errands would take careful planning. He couldn't buy everything from one store. That would be suspicious. Hardware stores kept records, and Ian's paranoid mind could imagine police reviewing security footage later, connecting purchases to an arson investigation. He'd need to spread it out. 3 different stores, pay cash, wear unremarkable clothes, be forgettable. At 7:30 a.m., his laptop dinged with a new email. Ian almost ignored it. Probably more spam, more bills he couldn't pay. But the sender name caught his attention. Dr. Connor McMasters. Ian's hands froze over the keyboard. He read the email once, then again, his paranoid mind dissecting every word for hidden meanings. Mr. Martin, I have some medications that might help with the stress you've mentioned. Given the sensitive nature, I'd prefer to discuss this privately at my home office rather than the clinic. Are you available this morning at 10 a.m.? No charge, just want to help a community member in distress. Dr. McMasters. Ian stared at the message. Every instinct screamed trap. McMasters was involved somehow. Had to be. The doctor was always there, always watching, always appearing at convenient moments. He'd been the first responder when Eleanor Henderson's death was reported. He'd treated Thomas Grayson, Margaret Chen, David Ortiz. Connor McMasters was the common thread. the key to understanding how dead people came back to life. But Ian also saw opportunity. If McMasters knew the secret, if he was somehow responsible for the resurrections, then confronting him might provide answers. Ian needed to understand what was happening before he could truly end it. And going to McMaster's home, seeing what the doctor kept there, might reveal more than any amount of paranoid speculation. Besides, 10 a.m. was early. Ian could visit McMaster's, assess the situation, determine if the doctor was threat or ally, then return to town by noon to finalise the fire plan. Arrive at Riverside Inn around 6:30 p.m. to set everything in motion. Watch it burn at 7:45. It was a good plan, thorough, certain. Ian's fingers moved across the keyboard with newfound confidence. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you, Doctor. What's your address? The response came within minutes, as if McMaster's had been waiting. 2847 Hollow Road, South Millbrook. See you at 10. Ian checked his watch. 7:55 a.m. Plenty of time. He grabbed his jacket and car keys, pausing in the doorway to look back at his condo. The maps, the notebooks, the empty bottles, evidence of his deteriorating mental state spread across every surface. But soon, none of it would matter. Tonight, everything changed. Tonight, he'd burn away his problems and emerge clean on the other side. He drove to the first hardware store, feeling something that resembled confidence for the first time in weeks. The clerk at Ace Hardware barely glanced at Ian as he loaded 2 gallons of kerosene and a box of rags onto the counter. Doing some cleanup? The clerk asked conversationally, scanning items. Clearing brush from my mother's property, Ian lied smoothly. She's elderly, can't handle it herself. That'll be $43.50. Ian paid cash and carried the purchases to his car. Simple. Easy. No suspicion. His paranoia eased slightly as he drove to the next store. At Riverside Hardware, different side of town, different clerk. He purchased road flares and a timing device advertised for sprinkler systems. Summer cottage, he explained, when the clerk raised an eyebrow. Winterizing before the season. Smart, the clerk agreed. You'd be surprised how many people forget. The third store, an electronics supply 20 minutes away in Bennington, provided the electronic timer he'd need to ensure he wasn't anywhere near the Riverside Inn when the fire started. The teenager working the counter was more interested in his phone than Ian's purchase. By 9:30 a.m., everything was loaded in his trunk. Ian felt a surge of confidence. This is going to work. Tonight, everything changes. What Ian didn't know was that Connor was 3 steps ahead, that the invitation was indeed a trap, but one more sophisticated than Ian imagined. He didn't know that every victim he thought he killed was waiting at Connor's farmhouse. He didn't know that Police Chief Rodriguez was positioning units nearby. And he didn't know that his carefully planned escape from financial and legal ruin was about to become his complete and total destruction. Ian Martin drove toward his final confrontation, believing he was about to win. He was wrong. At 9 a.m., Connor McMaster's farmhouse became a staging ground for the most important confrontation of his 400-year life. The 7 resurrected people, sitting and waiting as planned. Jennifer Wu set up the recording equipment earlier, testing angles and sound quality with meticulous attention to detail. Connor gathered them in his living room and explained the plan one final time. Ian will arrive at 10 a.m., expecting a private medical consultation. Instead, he'll find all of you alive, together. Impossible. We need his reaction recorded. Need him to confess on camera. Need enough evidence for Rodriguez to arrest him immediately. Eleanor stepped forward naturally, taking charge of positioning the way she'd organised countless school assemblies. David, Thomas, you're by the windows. Block any escape route. Margaret, Rebecca, you'll be seated on the couch, visible immediately when he enters. Harold, if you're up for it, you're in the armchair by the fireplace. I'll be standing here. She moved to the fireplace, testing the position. Jennifer, you're recording from the kitchen doorway, correct? 3 devices, Jennifer confirmed, gesturing to each location. My phone visible on the mantel. He'll see it, but won't think much of it since people leave phones everywhere. Connor's phone hidden on that bookshelf, and a small camera I disguised as a smoke detector up there. Everything will capture audio and video from multiple angles. Legally admissible if we do this right. Connor nodded, impressed. Jennifer had been thorough. Legal considerations are crucial here. We can't physically restrain Ian, or it becomes kidnapping. We can't threaten him, or it's assault. We let him speak. Let him react. Let him confess voluntarily. Rodriguez is 5 minutes away. If we call, this has to be clean. What if he runs? Thomas asked, his military training evident in the tactical question. He won't get far, Connor said. But if he tries, you and David block the exits without touching him. Just stand in the way. Make him have to physically push past you, which puts him in the aggressor role. What if he gets violent? Rebecca's voice was quiet but steady. Connor met her eyes. Then we call Rodriguez immediately and defend ourselves. But I don't think he will. Ian's a coward. He killed people when they were vulnerable, drowning in a bathtub, sleeping in their homes, alone and unsuspecting. Confronted with all of you alive and watching him, I think he'll break rather than fight. At 9:45 a.m., Connor's phone buzzed with a text from Chief Maria Rodriguez. Officers stationed nearby will respond immediately if needed. Doc, are you sure about this? Confronting a potentially dangerous man alone? Connor typed back quickly. I won't be alone, and I need to try this before he hurts anyone else. Trust me. Rodriguez's response was immediate. I do trust you, but I'm keeping units close. Call at first sign of trouble. Connor looked around the room at the 8 people who trusted him with more than they should. Rodriguez has officers nearby. We're as safe as we can be. Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirt nervously. Should we, I don't know, say a prayer or something? Connor expected awkwardness, but Eleanor immediately took Rebecca's hand. That's a good idea. The group formed a loose circle. Rebecca led the prayer, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about justice and protection, and facing evil with courage. Connor participated out of respect, though he wasn't sure any god would approve of his necromancy. The prayer seemed to calm the group, giving them a moment of unity before the confrontation. When it ended, Eleanor shifted immediately into her principal mood. All right, we've survived being murdered. We can handle this. Ian Martin needs to understand that his actions have consequences, that we're not just property to be acquired or obstacles to be removed. We're people. We matter. And today, he's going to face what he's done. Her words sparked nods around the room. David cracked a joke about haunting Ian better than any ghost could. Margaret made tea because, as she said with a slight smile, that's what civilized people do before confronting murderers. Thomas walked the perimeter of the room, checking sightlines and exit routes with military precision. Connor watched them prepare and felt something unfamiliar. Not quite pride. He was too old for simple emotions, but perhaps satisfaction. These people had been victims. Now they were taking control of their own justice. At 9:55 a.m., the sound of a car engine filtered through the farmhouse windows. Everyone froze. The teacups stopped clinking. The nervous chatter died. Thomas glanced at Connor and nodded. It was time. Positions, Eleanor said quietly, and everyone moved with surprising coordination. David and Thomas took their places by the windows, standing casually, but positioned to block exits. Margaret and Rebecca sat on the couch, hands folded, expressions calm. Harold settled into the armchair. Eleanor moved to the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. Jennifer retreated to the kitchen doorway, her phone ready. Connor walked to the front door and paused, taking a deep breath to center himself. 400 years of survival instincts kicked in. Connor had talked his way out of witch trials in Ireland, had faced inquisitions in Spain, had convinced suspicious authorities across centuries that he was nothing more than a skilled doctor. He'd faced death in every form, plague, violence, war, exposure, and walked away every time. But somehow, this moment felt different, more significant than anything in his long memory, because he wasn't alone anymore. He was standing with people he'd saved, people who trusted him, people who, impossibly, he'd started to care about. The risk was enormous. If this went wrong, if Ian got violent, if the confession didn't happen, if Rodriguez's officers couldn't respond in time, people might die again. And Connor wasn't certain he could bring them back a second time. Necromancy had limits he'd never fully tested. The doorbell rang. Connor opened the door to reveal Ian Martin. Haggard, desperate, suspicious, but trying desperately to appear normal. Dark circles under his eyes. 3 days of beard growth, poorly shaved. Cologne that didn't quite mask the smell of fear sweat. But dressed in business casual, standing straight, attempting a professional smile. Dr. McMasters, thank you for seeing me on short notice. Connor smiled, ancient and knowing. Of course, Ian. Come in. Let's talk. He stepped aside, gesturing Ian into the living room. Ian entered, and his eyes immediately fell on the 7 people sitting and standing in Connor's living room. His brain took a moment to process what he was seeing. Confusion flickering across his face as he recognized one face, then another, then another. The confusion shifted to shock, then to horror, then to something breaking. "Hello, Ian," Eleanor Henderson said calmly from her position by the fireplace. "Surprised to see me?" Ian's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe for support, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as his brain tried and failed to process what his eyes were showing him. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. He'd killed them, individually, methodically, successfully. He'd verified their deaths, had watched life leave their eyes, had felt pulses stop, had staged crime scenes around their bodies. Eleanor Henderson. He'd held her underwater for 4 full minutes, counted every second, watched her stop struggling at minute 2 and go completely still at minute 3. Had kept her under for the 4th minute just to be absolutely certain. Her lips had turned blue. Her eyes had been open, staring at nothing. Dead. Thomas Grayson. Ian had strangled him with a cord, felt the man's windpipe collapse under pressure, watched his face turn purple, then grey. Had checked for a pulse 3 times, finding nothing. Dead. Margaret Chen. The antifreeze poisoning. Ian had visited her in the hospital, only to see a miraculous recovery. Had seen Dr. McMasters himself. David Ortiz. Burned alive in his house. Ian had watched from across the street as David appeared in an upstairs window, screaming, trying to break the glass. Had watched the smoke overcome him, watched him disappear from view. The coroner had identified remains from dental records. Dead. All of them. Definitively, certainly, impossibly dead. And all of them standing here, breathing, staring at him with very alive eyes. Dead people didn't come back. The universe didn't work that way. Physics didn't work that way. Biology didn't work that way. Ian had researched death after his first murder, had read medical texts and forensic studies and autopsy reports, had learned about brain death, about the window for resuscitation, about the irreversible cellular damage that occurred when oxygen stopped flowing. He knew, absolutely knew, that once someone was dead beyond a certain point, they stayed dead. Except they didn't. Except here they were. Except Ian's entire understanding of reality was wrong, had been wrong, and he was either insane or living in a nightmare, or both. "This isn't real," Ian whispered. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else's throat. "You're not real. I killed you. All of you. I made sure." "You did kill us," David Ortiz said, his voice hard and certain. "But we got better." Ian's laugh was high-pitched, hysterical, the sound of a mind breaking in real time. No, that's impossible. People don't come back from death. This is a trick. You're twins, or actors, or I'm having a breakdown. "You are having a breakdown," Connor said quietly, closing the door behind Ian. The sound of the latch clicking felt final, like a cell door closing. "But we're real. They're real. And Ian, they all remember exactly what you did to them." Ian spun on Connor, and suddenly everything clicked in his paranoid mind like puzzle pieces forcing themselves into wrong spaces. "You. This is your doing. You're the doctor. You were always there, always watching. What are you? How did you do this?" Connor didn't answer directly. He just stood there, calm and patient, like a man with all the time in the world. "Does it matter? They're alive. Your murders failed. Every single one." "I killed her," Ian screamed, pointing at Eleanor with a shaking hand. "I held her under the water until she stopped struggling. She was dead. Her skin was blue, and her eyes, they were open and staring and dead." "Yes, I was dead," Eleanor confirmed, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades managing classroom chaos. And then I woke up, and I've been waiting for this moment, Ian. Waiting for you to understand that you can't just kill people for their property. Thomas Grayson stood, his military bearing evident as he moved to stand beside Eleanor. Ian flinched back instinctively. "You strangled me," Thomas said, his voice flat and factual. "I felt my windpipe collapse. I couldn't breathe. I died in my own living room. And you staged it as a burglary, knocked over my coin collection to make it look good." Margaret Chen rose next, joining them. Her voice was softer, but no less certain. "You poisoned me with antifreeze. Mixed it in my tea. Made it look like an illness. You smiled at me while I was dying. Told me everything would be fine." David moved from the wall, his anger more visible than the others. "You burned down my house with me inside. I tried to break the window, screamed for help. No one came. I died choking on smoke while you watched from across the street." Rebecca and Harold joined the line. People he'd murdered. People who came back. Impossible resurrections staring at him with very real, very alive eyes. Ian was shaking violently now, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking into fragments. "But you're dead. You have to be dead. I can't have failed every time. That's impossible. The odds alone, unless..." His eyes went wild, pupils dilating. "Unless you're demons, or zombies, or I'm in hell. Am I in hell? Is this hell?" "You're in Vermont," Connor said dryly. "In my living room, facing the consequences of killing 6 people. 7, Jennifer corrected, stepping forward from the kitchen doorway. The phone in her hand stayed steady, recording everything. "He killed me last night. Pushed my car off a bridge. I drowned, Ian. Just like Eleanor. Did you think that would be the one that stuck?" Ian stared at Jennifer, remembering the satisfaction of watching her car sink into the Black River, the bubbles that had stopped after 3 minutes, the certainty that she was dead, finally, permanently. "But you're dead. I saw you die. You're dead." "I was dead," Jennifer confirmed, "for about an hour. Then Connor brought me back, just like he brought back everyone else you killed." Something broke in Ian then, not shattered. That had already happened when he walked through Connor's door. This was a collapse, a complete structural failure of whatever mental framework had been holding him upright for the past 6 weeks. The confession poured out like water from a burst dam, unstoppable, manic. "I killed Eleanor because she wouldn't sell her house. Drowned her in her bathtub. And Thomas, I strangled him because he had that property on Main Street, and I needed the commission. Margaret, I poisoned her for her apartment, was going to flip it for development. David, I burned his house because the restaurant property. I could have made so much money. Rebecca, Harold, all of them. They were in my way, and I needed their properties and the money, and I was drowning in debt, and it was supposed to work. It was supposed to be easy." He was sobbing now, collapsed on Connor's floor, confessing to everything. "And Jennifer, I killed Jennifer because she was following me, investigating me, and I needed her gone. But none of you stayed dead. You keep coming back, and I don't understand how, and I can't make it stop. And I just wanted the money, and now I'm going crazy, and I see you everywhere, and..." Connor pulled out his phone with calm precision. "Maria, you need to come now. Ian Martin just confessed to 7 murders. We have him recorded. It's over." The next 3 minutes felt both eternal and instantaneous. Ian continued ranting about resurrections and impossible victims, while Connor and the others waited in silence. The sound of approaching footsteps filtered through the farmhouse walls, growing louder until they stopped outside. Chief Maria Rodriguez entered to find Ian Martin on the floor, still sobbing about zombies and necromancy, while 8 very alive people stood over him with expressions of grim satisfaction. She looked at Connor, at the resurrected patients, at the recording devices Jennifer was carefully securing, and said simply, "Doc, what the hell happened here?" "Justice," Eleanor Henderson replied, before Connor could speak. She met Rodriguez's eyes with the steady confidence of someone who'd spent decades as an authority figure. "Justice happened here, Chief, and I think you'll find Mr. Martin has quite a lot to confess about." Rodriguez approached Ian carefully, her hand near her weapon, but not on it. "Ian Martin, you're under arrest for..." "Attempted murder?" She glanced at Connor with clear confusion. "Doc, I'm going to need some explanations. We survived, Thomas said firmly. All of us. Ian tried to kill us, but we survived. And we just wanted him to know that we remembered, that we knew what he'd done. Survived, Rodriguez repeated slowly. Eleanor, he said he drowned you. I was there when they took your body away. I was unconscious, not dead, Eleanor said smoothly. She'd clearly prepared for this moment. Dr. McMasters found me in time, revived me. The shock of the experience left me with some memory issues initially, but I remembered everything eventually. It was barely believable. But Rodriguez was looking at 7 living people and one man who'd just confessed to 7 murders on recording. The physics of the situation were less important than the evidence. Ian was cuffed, read his rights, while still sobbing about resurrections and demons. Rodriguez took brief statements from each of the victims, who told carefully prepared stories about surviving their attacks, misdiagnosed deaths, comas, miraculous recoveries. The stories were full of holes, but they had the one piece of evidence that mattered. Ian's confession, recorded in perfect clarity from 3 different angles. As police led Ian away, he looked back at Connor one last time. His eyes had the empty quality of someone who'd seen too much, understood too little, and broken completely in the gap between the two. What are you? He whispered. Connor smiled, ancient and cold. I'm exactly what you need me to be, Ian. A reminder that some games have consequences. Ian was driven away in a police car, his ranting about resurrections ensuring he'd be psychiatrically evaluated before any trial. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, taking with it weeks of fear and planning and murderous intent. Everyone slowly relaxed as the police cars disappeared down the long driveway. The tension that had held them rigid for weeks, some for months, finally released like a wire snapping. Rebecca started crying quietly, years of trauma pouring out in silent tears. Harold put a hand on her shoulder, his military bearing softening into something gentler. David laughed. Actual, genuine laughter that sounded almost hysterical. And Margaret joined him, the two of them releasing stress through sound. Thomas Grayson walked to the window and watched the road where the cruisers had vanished. It's really over, he said, almost to himself. I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Don't have to wonder if he's planning another attempt. He'll never get out, Jennifer said with certainty. That confession, the psychiatric evaluation he's going to need, the evidence we compiled. Ian Martin is going away for the rest of his life. Eleanor Henderson crossed the room to Connor and hugged him fiercely. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact, the first time she'd let her guard down completely around the man who'd brought her back from death. We did it, she said against his shoulder, her voice muffled. It's over. Thank you. Thank you for saving us, for giving us our lives back, for believing we deserved justice. Connor hugged her back, this fierce woman who'd died and come back, and refused to let him treat her as a chess piece in his revenge game. She'd taken charge of the confrontation, organised the other patients, turned Connor's plan into something better than he'd imagined. You saved yourselves, he said quietly. I just gave you the chance. You gave us our lives back, Eleanor corrected, pulling away to look at him directly. All of us, and we won't forget that. Jennifer approached next, and Connor pulled her into the embrace as well. She'd been dead less than 12 hours ago, had drowned in the Black River while investigating a killer. Now she stood here, alive and recording evidence and helping bring that killer to justice. Thank you for bringing me back, she said quietly. Thank you for helping me remember why I do this, Connor replied, meeting her eyes. Not for entertainment, not for games, not for the intellectual challenge of outwitting criminals. For them, for people who deserve a second chance. Thomas raised an imaginary glass in a toast to Connor McMasters, the world's strangest doctor and our official guardian angel. I'm not an angel, Connor protested, uncomfortable with the praise. No, Eleanor agreed, a slight smile on her face. You're something else entirely, something older and stranger, and probably more dangerous than we understand. But you saved us, all of us, and whatever you are, wherever you came from, however you learned to bring people back from death, we're grateful. The others murmured agreement. David clapped Connor on the shoulder hard enough to make a normal man stagger. Margaret squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Rebecca smiled through her tears and whispered, "Thank you." Harold nodded with military respect, the gesture carrying more weight than words. Connor felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, an emotion he'd spent 400 years avoiding because it made survival complicated. Connection. Belonging. The sense that he'd done something that mattered beyond his own continued existence. These people knew what he was, at least partially. They'd seen him perform necromancy, had experienced resurrection firsthand, and they were grateful rather than afraid. It was disorienting, and dangerous, and wonderful. But even as they celebrated, even as the tension dissolved into relief and exhaustion, and something close to joy, Connor's ancient mind was already working on the next problem. Ian's confession was recorded from 3 angles. The evidence was clear and overwhelming. But explaining how 7 people survived murders they definitely didn't survive would require more than miraculous stories and convenient medical misdiagnoses. Rodriguez would have questions. She already had questions. Connor had seen them in her eyes. The state police would want to investigate. Medical examiners would want to review death certificates that Connor had signed, pronouncing people dead who are now walking around. Insurance companies would investigate the fraud angles, looking into policies that had paid out on deaths that apparently didn't happen. And somewhere in all those investigations, someone might start connecting dots that led back to Connor's 4-century secret. The game wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. One that might require Connor to disappear, to abandon Millbrook and start over somewhere else with a new identity and a new life. He'd done it before, dozens of times across the centuries, and he could do it again. Connor looked at the 7 people in his living room and felt something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. These people knew parts of his secret. They'd experienced his necromancy firsthand. They were grateful now, but gratitude was unstable. People talked. People got curious. People asked questions that led to more questions. 400 years of survival had taught Connor one absolute truth: trust no one completely. The moment you did, the moment you let someone truly see what you were, that was when the danger began. Witch trials, inquisitions, medical boards, government agencies. It didn't matter the century. The result was always the same. Exposure meant running, or worse. He'd gotten sloppy, letting Jennifer investigate alongside him, letting these victims see the pattern, orchestrating this confrontation with all of them together, letting them witness Ian's complete breakdown and confession. It had been necessary to stop Ian, but now Connor had 7 people who knew too much. Not the full truth. They didn't know about 1625, or Ireland, or the 400 years, but they knew he could bring people back from death. They knew he was more than a small-town doctor, and that was already too much. Connor would need to watch them carefully, monitor their conversations, their curiosity, their questions, be ready to leave if any of them started digging deeper into who or what Dr. Connor McMasters really was. Outside, the November sun broke through clouds, casting long shadows across Connor's farmhouse. Inside, people who'd cheated death celebrated their victory over a serial killer. And in the corner, watching them with ancient eyes, Connor McMasters began planning his exit strategy, just in case. The fire at Riverside Inn would never happen. Ian Martin's final murder remained forever theoretical, a plan that died with his sanity in Connor's living room. But Connor knew that in a small town like Millbrook, secrets had a way of spreading. And if his secret got out, if these 7 grateful people ever became 7 curious investigators, he'd need to disappear. Centuries of experience had taught him that much. For now, there was relief. Justice had been served. Ian Martin would spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility, ranting about impossible resurrections that no one would believe. But Connor's game was far from over. It was just entering its most dangerous phase, the phase where people thought they knew him,